Before we start today, thank you, Richard. Another donation is much appreciated. Thank you. And all you guys who've made multiples, that's really nice. Much appreciated. And it tells me I'm appreciated, I guess, at some level. So there are a number of questions, a couple of good questions coming up that are really sort of key questions in terms of the way we work. So I was very pleased to hear from Gail bringing in the subject, this following one. I've read in several sources that Sargent advised using a limited number of values, 3 in a drawing and no more than 5 in a painting. Do you have an opinion on this? Would there be an advantage? Apparently the human eye can detect 400 values, so it doesn't seem that having a larger number of values in an artwork would be confusing or wasted on the viewer. After studying the values in some Sargent works, I'm not convinced that he held himself to that standard anyway, except perhaps in his murals. Do you consciously limit the number of values in your own work? So what we're talking about now, it would be simplistic to say that Sargent's work had 3 values. Anyone looking at his work, at virtually any piece of it, including the murals, which are the least, sort of the least interesting that way, or that's, what should I say, the least extensive that way. But that's purposeful. When you're reducing the number of values, you're trying to reduce, partly what you're doing is trying to correspond with the relatively low or minimum number of, of values in the walls and the architecture and that sort of thing. You're trying to sort of correspond with that. So there's a reason why you might reduce yourself to a couple of values, but there are other reasons too, and that's just the idea of flat patterning. The more busyness as you have, the harder it is to see the patterns and to enjoy the patterns, which become part of the architecture. Pattern being that two-dimensional cutout, which you'll see in one of these Sargents coming up. But I think there's only one way in which we can positively say we reduce ourselves to 3 values, and it's a key thing. And I'm disappointed in myself, Gail, if I haven't covered what would have included this, but not in these words, right? So it's one of those things, by the way, you can say that Sargent said to use 3 values or 5 values and no more. What did he mean? I mean, this is where you have to have context, and because you can plain see that he's not doing just a couple values. And so that being the case, what is he saying? What would he be talking about? So speaking only for me, and you'll find a correspondence to this in the Max Meldrum conversation as well. Let's go to pictures to look at this. So here are 2 Sargents. The drawing on the right, you could say is relatively speaking a couple values, right? There's a sort of, or maybe 3 values, sort of this major dark thing going through here that could be all said to be 1. This big light, which is all the rest of the stuff, and then there's sort of a middle tone element, whatever that is. There's a sort of a middle tone element in this thing. So you could say that picture rather reduces to 3 values, right? On the other hand, every time you turn form, there's more than 3 values there, right? There has to be. Gradation requires it. So that anytime something tubes up, there's sort of an infinite number of values. So you wouldn't want to be simple-minded about this. So what the heck did he mean, right? What was he talking about? And this is even more to the point, right? I mean, first of all, this doesn't even begin to look like 3 values. And again, with all that variation, you wouldn't even be able to get the life in the form and that sort of thing without incredibly more values than that. So what did he mean? Well, I can only give you what we mean, what we're talking about when we do it. It has everything to do with the visual order and a way of approaching our start, our lay-ins. And that is, so what I'll have you do if you'll look at this picture with me is just blur your eyes. And again, you can use that word squint your eyes if you prefer. But what you want to do, I prefer actually closing one eye, and dimming the other one. The other one get really dimmed down because then it's even weaker. And when you do that, you'll see that this thing here suddenly does reduce to 3 values. But how do we mean that? Well, the word major has to kick in, doesn't it? Major values. So you could see, in a sense, this thing could arguably be said to be two values if you blur down a bunch, right? It could be said to be this big old dark, starts here and goes all the way around here, and this big old light that goes wandering through here. And those are the values. That's the value system. It's basically two values. Did I do another one like that? I did this one. Yeah, this is an early painting by him, in which you can think of it the same way. You just blur your eyes slightly, right? And you see major mass of dark and a blob and some others. Let's skip these others, but at least the major mass of dark and a blob. And then you see this massive white here. Now, that's what I'd call a two-value thought, right? If you blur down, looking at anything in nature, this is a huge help to actually be able to reduce this. If you blur down a ton, and don't look in, don't look hard, just look weakly at it, you'll see the quietness of all these secondary values. Not that they don't exist, right? All this little stuff in here, they all exist. So there's a whole range of values. There's this set of values. There's absolute light values here. Then there's middle dark values, then darker ones, and the same thing up here. So, and by the way, this one arguably could be said to be 5 values, but you can't just say it has 5 values. You'd paint simplistically. So what he's saying is, though, that there are majors. We're talking about majors. And that's what we say. I'm sorry, I shouldn't put words in his mouth. We're talking about the major effects. So if it is patently true that these blues are a third value, right, and it really does look like they are and by the way, this idea of dominating values is a big deal. So even when I looked at this and I said, oh, don't you see, this is all basically one. Well, that could be said to be so because the midtones in here are closer to the whites than they are to the darks, so they become one with that for a while. And that's the way you think. That's how you can lay in a painting, a start, and have it be all pulled together by the time you get to the end. Because you'll have that essential unity of this, and then you'll see with how little you can deviate from it to do the midtones, say the blues. But maintaining the unity that you've seen in your initial separation between the major dark thing and the light. Okay? So it's a matter of controlling it too, and being systematic is a big deal. If you don't, when you first look at something, if you don't blur down, you won't see the unity of this whole mass here, right? I try to get students looking at a cast to just see that it's, depending on what the wall and table are doing, but you could say that in a lot of cast drawings, there's just a light that goes on the wall, it comes up into the cast, and that's it, or some such thing, right? Or the darks, if it's a dark tablecloth, you'll say the darks are creeping down the shadow side of the figure, of the cast, and then going up, right, and making its own interesting little shape as it goes up into the background and out of the picture. That's what this is, right? So it's a big dark thing here. Now this thing, if it was typical cast painting, you'd actually have it darker here, but we don't have that. But this is easily seen as the dark, right? And this is easily seen as basically the same as this one, actually. It's basically a light and dark picture. It's a two-value one, except it isn't, right? And that secondary, in this case you're talking about here, there are middle tones all through here. So and even though you're talking about these as darks, they aren't all the same darks. So there's maybe several values at the minimum, but again, it results from your blurring your eyes. You're not going to see it if you don't blur your eyes. Again, I look at this one and I ask, how in the heck can you think this is a 5-value system, right? There's no such thing. I mean, blur your eyes down and you're going to see this brilliant light here and this stuff here. So there's several bright lights. You could call those one. And then you're going to say say in this sort of general area is a secondary one, a middle value. Maybe some of this participates with it. So that's a middle value, a secondary one. And then you might have darker ones and darker ones and darker ones. But I'm simply showing you that there are lights, like the lights here are not as bright as the lights here. So how many values is that, right? So, but even in the head, you can see there's a bright light and a secondary light and a middle tone. There's 3 of them there, none of which are like any of the values in here. So you're way past 5 values. On the other hand, if you blur your eyes, you can play this game much more simply. And you'll see that this could be said to be a big middle tone, participating with this one in that general tonality thing, in that general tone. And that you can see the lights spot, and then dancing their way through here. And you can see the blob of the big darks right here. That could be said to be a 3-value system. And that's the way we think of it in any case, okay? Just to make that really clear to you. Remember, I've talked to you about the blurred eye before, and what happens when you blur your eye down is there are 2 things that happen if you blur down enough. One is you can see what your leading effects are, and in this case, it's the lights, right? You can see that it's the lights. I say the leading values are. But secondly, you can actually see the leading effects, which might be a spot like this here or here or here or here, right? And I say it's a set. It's not one, although one of them may be slightly more leading than the rest. But you should be able to see. And by the way, I'm trying to improve on my arrow. I got a bigger one that I'm looking at, but you're not seeing it, I'm told. So I'm trying to do this through Google and set up these presentations through Google, so you'll have a bigger arrow. But I'll try to move it more slowly so you can see these better. But the concept here is to blur your eyes. Just blur the heck out of your eyes so you can see what you should work on first. In the beginning, you're going to work on the grand unities of these things, maybe sweeping into the middle ones or whatever, and the spotting, the distribution of the spots, right, of the leading effects. Those are going to be your primary mission in a lay-in of a painting like this. And so the way we work, you're trying to cover the canvas in that first day, right? You're trying to cover the canvas and cover it intelligently in that first day. So all the more reason for you to understand these major masses, because you're going to have to cover these masses, not simplistically. So they rather look like what they are, but not with lost attention. You have to finish getting these guys, the leading elements of these guys, really nailed into their right places. So at the end of that day, you can be sure that your game is good, that your values, your light effects are also going to produce the work you want. And that they're in the right place, well placed. So it'll be a series of these. Won't be all of them, but it'll be a whole series of these plays that have to be in the right place in relation to each other for this to be a good setup. So yeah, so you can see that even like down here, last thing you're going to do is start drawing a bunch of stuff and things if you haven't set up your major masses, right? So that's all we're really thinking about, Gail. And so what happens when you're drawing things and stuff is you see all these things and you see them as a challenge. You see the chandelier as a challenge. Well, when you first blur your eyes, you shouldn't see that. You should see you see this evolution of this value out of the dark, moving over, and becoming a light. And you're going to articulate a few places like that edge right there to placeholder, to hold its place in space. And of course, your play is going to be, you're going to want something in sort of every corner of the room. You're going to want some exits, even some of which are weak, something like this. These are all keys to this setup of this painting. But in every area, you have what I'd call the key spot, some great locator thing in between this exit and this spot right here. This effect. You have the placeholder, something that will hold your spot for you. So you'll have exits down somewhere elsewhere, and you might be thinking of it as this one, or this is certainly a very clear one over here. And those things will be participating, as you've seen in the starts. If you haven't seen the starts by what's his name, Tarbell in particular, you won't precisely know what I'm talking about, so look those up, okay? But that's what we're talking about. That's the only thing in my history that I've had to deal with in terms of that question. You have to be talking about the majors, the major masses and the major effects, the limited major effects that set up what we call the arabesque. So there you are, and that's the game, okay? I hope that's clear enough, but Gail, if it isn't, come back at me, okay? And let's go down a couple more. I just want you to see the murals. So here you can see that these, like this one here, this is the Museum of Fine Arts mural. These are Greek subject murals. By the way, I've never even thought twice about the architecture of that building. It's pretty much a shame. So I'm guessing there's some aspect of the Greek in the building. But you can see here, this is a really simple three-value system, right? 3 white or 4 white things, these things very near white that are not quite white, and then what we would call the darks, which is these blue spots in here. Again, look at the Greek vases to see how this patterning works, this idea of patterning works. This is really delightful patterning. Same thing is happening here, where you can see that basically the middle darks are the faces, that sort of area. Although there's a shadow here, so it's really harder to tell on this one. But the basic lights, powerful, big lights, again, blur your eyes just slightly, and this happens. That's what I'm saying there. Even though there's obviously more values, you wouldn't be able to get folds in the cloth or anything like that. There's obviously more values, but there's way more unity in this than there is in the other, in a typical painting from life, a portrait, for example. I say unity, a subdivision by 2 or 3, right? So, but I think everybody gets that, right? Everybody sees the darks here. You see what I'd call the major light, and yet the major light is broken up with 2 lights. It has lights and it has mid-tone lights. And that pretty much limits it. Yeah. I mean, you could argue that there's a fourth, these middle values that aren't darks that are floating in through here. And that's fine. Yeah, but according to Sargent, that's fine. But you know this is mural painting. It's trying to stay relatively flat. So it doesn't want to be this grand three-dimensional thing that you get out of this drama of light. But it's about pattern. So, and then these at the Museum of, I'm sorry, at the Boston Public Library, uh, are these, I think this is, I don't know, it's a history of religion. I try to remember, I should know what the name of this is. So I probably shouldn't bring it up. But again, you can see, and this brings up one other question, by the way. It's a three-color question. So when we talk about color, you actually, when you're looking at a color scheme, you're actually trying to see what is the red, the yellow, and the blue. You're trying to reduce this. And by the way, don't have to say that. It's just a triad. But it's kind of like one of the earliest things you're going to do, like when you're looking at a landscape. What are the major color masses? And it's the same exact thing. You don't want to be looking for 18. You can manage 3, and then there'll be sub-play within those 3. But then some people will say, well, let's just mass in the grass in this big solid way and chunk stuff onto it. The Impressionist doesn't do that. It's less than all the horses at once thinking that we really want to maintain. So that's a story for another day. But again, you can see these have a tendency to feel like this is background's blue, this is red, this part here, all the lights are the yellow, right? Red, yellow, blue. And the same thing here. Obviously, the blue now has become the center part, and the yellow's out here. And is there a red? And I have to stare closer at this to see how much he had. So you'll see there's elements of red dashing in through and gashing around a little bit. They typically, by the way, the colors typically also come, and just as values do, they come in different proportion. You don't want equal amounts of dark and light. You don't want equals, right? So you'll find that even though all these have to have is that sensation of 3s, and the amount isn't really the issue as long as it doesn't just feel like 2s, which, yeah. So, yeah. And I think that's probably all we have to say about that. This one here is one of the more complex ones, has a much stronger feeling of the third dimension. And I don't know when he did this in relation to the others, but this is significantly more values than 3. It doesn't feel like 3. But again, what do, right? You just look at it. You blur your eyes down. Here are the 3 or darks, right? Here are the darks. But then there's a dark middle tone here. But let's skip that. Then there's the gray mass, because this is bigger than that. We skip it. This is this greater mass of middle tone. And then the stuff in between. This is the lights, right? You follow me? So that this might be the 4th value. And it happens again, say here, and part of it. And that's how you can see what we're talking about. So this value, which is slightly darker, both of these values are in the middle tone range, not in the light middle tone, but in the middle tone. So, yeah. So Gail, I'm hoping that's helpful. And but I really, really want to emphasize for you all that this is a crucial question in terms of how you lay in a picture. And I can't remember if it was Lynn or who it was recently. We're talking about this idea of getting the canvas covered, and not stupidly. And this is very much what we're talking about. If you don't understand these major mass, the idea of majors by blurring down, you won't know what the end game is for the start. And that is precisely what it is for at the start. And of course, those 3 things have to be well said to each other, because that's also part of the finish. All right, good. So, did I thank Richard? Yes, I did. Thank you, Richard. And I think you're next on the line for a question too, so I'll get to that. And thank you, everyone, for all your kind words. And I really do hope in these sort of depressing days that you will be able to work and just work through it. Just look ahead. Just painting is worth it, and it'll bring life to your soul, because that's all you're looking for actually all the time out there. Is you're looking for the beauty lies, and the discovery of it, it's just even in nature itself, elevates the soul. I should tell you a story, but I think I better not. It's wonderful stories. If you read, I've read the histories of the Gulag and things like that, and it's fascinating how many people have had their lives saved by an experience in nature. Just something they saw that they knew God had made. It might have been a rock, and there was this affection for it, this love, this elevating thing that it did to them. Consider that a factor in your job. Just consider it. Is that a factor, in your work? All right, so I'm out of here. And see you in the next one. I'm sure I've forgotten something. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share. And if there's a like button somewhere, do that too. I see all these guys online saying like, so I don't know if I have that. All right, you all take care. Have a great week.